Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in today's video we have very rare items from the Nerebar Palace raid. So one of these we already looked at. There's a video I made like a month ago where I looked at the stuff from the raid, and some of that's actually changed, so we'll look at some of those trinkets as well that have changed since then. But also they've added in a bunch more very rares. So first off, we've got the Wings of Shattered Sorrow. This is a cloak. It does have stamina on it, something to always check when you're checking these very rare items, see if they're trying to pull a fast one on us like they were with the Sark cloak. And this one actually is defensively themed. So it's a crit haste cloak. It works with any stat, of course, as basically all cloaks do these days. Taking damage greater than 25% of your health grants you a bunch of avoidance and increases healing taken by 10% for 10 seconds. This effect may only occur every 90 seconds, and also falling damage reduced, which actually would be relevant in like a raid fight every expansion or so. There's fall damage in a raid boss, so actually there's ones on Razageth and Fireack this expansion, so and Senarth if you did it wrong, which did happen. So potentially a useful little piece of text at the bottom there, but mostly this is if you take a hit bigger than 25% of your health, you get some avoidance and increased healing taken. That increased healing taken tends not to be that good of a stat, but the times where you'd want it would be after you've taken damage greater than 25% of your health, if there's more incoming damage soon. And that's also the times where you'd want avoidance. So this looks pretty well calibrated to be quite good in a lot of cases in Raid in particular, but also on M+ bosses that are just blasting your group. It needs to be a hit of damage that is greater than 25% of your health, obviously, so that means that it's going to be easier for this to trigger on AoE damage for DPS and healers. Whereas for tanks, this is just going to kind of proc on CD if you're getting autoed by stuff that hits hard enough, because those things will be taken off more than 25% of your health. Like bosses, raid bosses, for instance, will be doing that. And that means that you're not going to be getting much targeted value out of this, but you'll be getting consistent value instead out of the healing taken increase, which is a lot less useful in that case than... I think the biggest case for this is for DPS players and for healers, where you have a fight like Tindril, right, where you kind of all stack up and the roots happen or a falling star happens, and then there's another damage instance in the near future, and the players with Wings of Shattered Sorrow equipped are going to be in less danger from that next event and more quick to get healed up from the first damage event. Pretty powerful effect for sure. Seal of the Poisoned Pact is up next. This is a ring, a crit mastery ring. Dealing damage has a high chance to grant you a dose of venomous potential. At 5 doses, you inject them into your target to deal a nasty nature dot. And if you're dealing nature damage, you have a chance to get an additional dose. So a little bit of synergy with nature damage, like the fire rings. But unlike those fire rings, you don't need to be doing nature damage. As long as you're doing any damage, you're going to be getting value out of this. And if you like crit at all, you're going to like this ring because it's just raw value, right? It's like the Aranog and Broodkeeper rings. This is, I'm pretty sure this is a full stat budget of secondary stats with a damaging effect on top, approximately 4 procs per minute as well. So you're going to be getting 1 hit of this 5-dose thing per minute-ish, more if you're doing nature damage. Seems pretty, like a pretty no-brainer, powerful item. Up next is the Sareki Zealot's Insignia. This is a necklace, a haste mastery necklace, that says receiving healing from allies has a high chance to restore mana to your ally and grant you both versatility for 10 seconds. So once again, this is an any role trinket. In fact, it's kind of worse for healers than it is for other people, because healers often tend to not be receiving healing from the other healers as much as DPS and tank players are. You can sometimes, but depending on the raid you're in particular, a lot of healers like to heal themselves, and you kind of get this muscle memory of not worrying about healing the people in the healer group, and because they often will be immediately concentrating on healing themselves if they get hit and they get low. So this may be the kind of effect that you actually want on non-healers, and the fact that you're getting versatility, right? You get versatility on the healer, you get mana on the healer, but you also get versatility on the necklace wearer. So this is going to be something where, DPS players that like haste are certainly going to argue, probably correctly, that they should be getting this first in high-end guilds. In, of course, normal, regular guilds, all 3 of these first very rares that we looked at are just good for everybody. They're high item level. Everybody can and should roll on these, and the only cases where you really wouldn't want any of these is if you didn't like the secondaries on them. Otherwise, they're all just going to be definitely great, but, if you happen to be a spec that hates haste, hates crit, Obviously these items are not going to be good, but all of these secondary effects are somewhere between good and great, depending on the circumstances. So I think this is a pretty good place for the very rares to be. They're all good. They're all like best in slot in those spots, but they're not like massive throughput increases like Whispering Incarnate Icon was, for instance, where it was like, oh man, this trinket's my best by a lot, right? Like I really want to get this. Instead, it's like, oh, this is a necklace that also does a little more than a necklace, right? This is like 1.05 necklaces. Or it's a necklace with like a tiny fraction of a trinket stapled onto it. Cool. And it's definitely good. Then finally, we have the Void Reaver's Warp Blade, which already talked about in the earlier video about the raid loot, because this one was already in. This is a fist weapon that drops from Nexus Princess Kaiveza, and it's a fist weapon with a less stat budget that does have a proc dot, so single target themed fist weapon, sort of along the veins of the Council of Dream one, the Painsmith one. And there's a 2-piece that you can get along with an Agi trinket that drops from the same boss. This Agi trinket has a chance to proc dealing damage, and if the target's below 35% health, it deals 50% more damage effectively. And if you have the dot on the target from the Warp Blade, then this 2-piece makes it so that you always get that execute value, although you might not have full uptime on this, so it's actually a little bit weaker than you'd think on above 35% health. It's not actually always, you're not always going to have this up when the contract procs, but still, it's a nice little bit of extra value in that case. It's a high item of a weapon. It's presumably going to be best in slot for single target. This is going to be worth more than the stats on single target damage, or they're going to buff it until it is. And yeah, maybe not great for AoE though, because you'd rather usually have stats than a single target damage proc in a lot of AoE cases. So depending on how much value this gives you in single target, you may actually not be that interested in M+ on some specs. And then another thing that is not just very rare, but is extremely rare, is the mount from Queen Ansurek. There is a mythic mount as well that's like a red recolor of this that is dropping on mythic, and then there's the all difficulties but rare drop chance one that is this Sureki, or I guess that is this embodiment of the Blazing. It is this Sureki Skyraiser. All right, up next we have some cantrip weapons, which include Fate Weaved Needle. Now, I actually want to start by talking about Fate Weaver, because I think that might be related to Fate Weaved Needle. Because Fate Weaver is an offhand that lets you, on use, fashion a Fate Weaved weapon, which maybe means that you create Fate Weaved Needle if you drop Fate Weaver, and it's sort of like you get this item and then you get to have a Fate Weaved Needle as well. Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure exactly how that'll work out, but that's something from reading this on use. Either way, Fate Weaved Needle says your harmful and helpful spells have a chance to weave a thread between you and your target for 5 seconds. Allies gain bonus primary stat while the thread holds, and enemies take damage when the thread breaks. So a little, int effect that is instead of secondaries on the Fate Weave Needle, so that's a pretty serious cost, but giving extra primary stat to the person that you're tethered with, and then popping for some damage on an enemy. Either of those effects would potentially be quite good, especially healers being able to buff DPS players with primary stat. That's something that DPS players definitely will like the sound of. We have the Befouler's Syringe up next. So this is a non-primary stat having haste polearm. It's haste stamina, but no primary stat. Your melee attacks and abilities have a chance to befoul the blood of your enemy, dealing damage over 10 seconds. Additional injections overlap. Overlap means that they'll get a new stack, but it won't refresh the duration. It'll just be a new stat, like Iron Furs, right, where it'll get the full time of it, but not so as you get one injection of this, 10 seconds of damage, 5 seconds later you get a new injection, and then for 5 seconds you're ticking 2 injections at once, and then for the next 5 seconds after that you're back down to 1. If a target dies while affected, you siphon the poison back into the blade, granting your next melee abilities some extra nature damage. Interesting effect there. Loss of primary stat on a weapon is certainly a serious cost, so hopefully this damage is tuned to the point where it makes up for the loss of primary stat. Tanks interested in using this as well, such as Brutemasters and Guardian Druids. One problem here is that you get defensive value out of primary, So this might be an offensive trade-off and giving up some defensive value. Then, as we already talked about, there's the Void Reaper's Warp Blade. Then there's this shield. So this shield doesn't have stamina on it, but it does have bonus armor. And taking magic damage has a chance for the webbing to react and adapt, spinning warding threads around you for 30 seconds. While active, they absorb all damage you would take from that source's spell school up to a flat amount. And this is a 2-minute ICD on these warding threads proccing. So it's an interesting shield, right? Because against magic damage, you're going to get these warding threads. Against physical damage, you're going to get this bonus armor. Against bleeds, you're going to be sad. But against everything else, you basically are going to get some value. Does that make up for losing the stam? Stam is pretty good. Stam is pretty good, but maybe this will still be good. Maybe this will still be worth. And it's a cool little effect here. And then there's a bunch of trinkets. We've already looked at a lot of these, but some of them have changed, apparently. Okay, this one looks different. This is Gruesome Syringe, which says your healing abilities have a high chance to cause you to inject yourself with serum. If an ally drops below 70% health, you expel a charge to heal them. If unconsumed after 15 seconds, the charges instead give you primary stat for 10 seconds instead. So this syringe, which is not in intellect by default, it's a crit trinket by default, will give you a bunch of int in cases where people aren't taking damage. Now, as a healer, there's not a lot of super hard content where people aren't dropping below 70% health every so often. But there are phases, even in like super scary M+, there will be sections, there will be trash pulls where this isn't happening, perhaps. And those are the times where you're focusing on damage and you're really happy to get some extra int to blast the boss even harder. Or in some cases, maybe you've got a spot where you aren't dropping low for a while, you get your intellect, and then you get to... you get a big healing moment, and the int helps with that too. But even if not, even if you're never getting the second part, just the fact that every time people drop below 70% health, they're getting charges of your healing, right? They get like auto-healed when they drop below 70% health. That's a pretty useful effect. That particular effect would probably be more useful if it was a lower number than 70%. But still, I imagine you'll get some good value out of this. Then there's the Mad Queen's Mandate, which is a crit trinket as well, that does a bunch of damage and healing over 2 seconds on a target. And it does more if the target's low, and its cooldown gets reduced if the effect kills a target. This seems potentially pretty sweet to use, like, to execute mobs even in M+, but also in Raid, even if there's, like, ads, right, like Sarkareth ads that you want to kill. You click this when it's at 5% or whatever, do a bunch of damage to it, get the cooldown reduction as well. Could be pretty cool. And I think that's it. I think most of these other trinkets are pretty similar to how I remember them. I haven't double-checked 100%, but if you want to go look, I'll put a link to my old video talking about the Rage trinkets up in the top right corner of the screen, and you can go take a look at that. I'll also link these posts down in the description below so you can read all these things for yourself. Let me know if any of these jump out at you. Let me know what you think. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.